Good morning, everyone. We will get started here shortly. We're still allowing a few people to join. All right. Good morning, everyone, and happy Monday. And go Tigers. I know last night's game was not great, but, hopefully they'll do something today. All the LSU fans out there. This is the certification monthly call. I'm Christy Ballou, Director of Certification. We have a lot of updates today, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to talk through is to talk through some legislative updates. Then we'll talk through some proposed policy updates, certification updates, generally what has come through or processing updates that we're working on, and then some reminders and, of course, our call summary. So there was a lot of legislation this legislative session that affected certification. Some of it we had input on and some of it we did not. So I'm just going to briefly try and go through the high points of what we've found in most of this legislation. This is generic information, and we're digging in still, of course, and we are going to be more specific as we bring policy and as that gets a little bit closer. We do plan to bring policy in alignment with a lot of this legislation for August, Bessie. So the first piece was from House Bill 191. It was signed by the governor, so it has now become Act 63. It was proposed by Jefferson. It updates literacy requirements. Basically what it does is it aligns the literacy options for traditional and alternately prepared teacher candidates. Prior to this piece of legislation, traditionally prepared candidates to meet literacy requirements must have completed semester hours, and then alternately prepared candidates could have completed a whole host of other options, like they could have done semester hours, they could have done contact hours, they could have done teaching a reading exam, those types of things. And so what this does is this aligns and allows for both traditionally prepared and alternately prepared teacher candidates to have all of the same options. It also allows, it was the biggest part that it did was it's allowing some updates around evaluation to kind of address a variety of settings. Out-of-state settings, in-state non-public settings, contracted or third-party vendor type educators. It will also allow for the mixing of evaluation types, and it says that Bessie can define the rules and processes for those particular evaluations and what that process looks like. So basically what it says for OS is that they need at least 3 years of out-of-state successful evaluations to be credited for their years of service. That was already in place. That did not change. So it didn't change that piece. But what it did change was in-state non-public educators could use their non-public successful evaluations to be credited for their years of service. And for educators that are not employed by, but maybe contracted to a public school, it did say that the company needs to be approved by the board before they can be credited for those evaluations. But if they have successful evaluations, they can be credited with them. And then it says that Bessie has to define what that process looks like. As many of you are aware, educators that were serving in non-public and then moving to public or public and then going to non-public, many times they had to have a whole separate certificate, and we were not able to mix evaluation types. We will be proposing policy to align with this, and our proposed policy will allow us to quote unquote mix evaluation types. So if an educator is serving in non-public one year and then public the next, the year that they were in non-public, we would use local evaluations. The year that they were in public, we would use compass evaluations. And so we still have to sort out all the details with the policy, but we do plan to bring that in August. The next piece of legislation was Senate Bill 81 from McMath. It was also signed by the governor, and it became Act 99. It's the associate teacher pathway, and it has a lot of requirements in it, and we still have a lot of fleshing out to do for this particular pathway. But we wanted to provide you with, the most information that we had at the time. And so basically what this pathway says is that school systems can hire an educator that has an associate's degree from an accredited college or university, as long as they're continuously enrolled in an undergraduate teacher education program that's accredited, while they're trying to obtain their bachelor's degree for teacher education, basically. They also have to be 25 years old. They can't participate in this program for more than 5 years. They do have to be employed to teach only in the content area that's related to that particular participant's associate's degree. Cannot be in a special education area. It allows for some of the hours spent teaching to count towards their student teaching hours. It does put a cap on the salary for this particular teacher, since they're not fully certified yet and they're not fully prepared. These candidates cannot be paid more than 75% of the average yearly teacher salary for that employing school system. They are required to have a mentor that is, of course, subject to funding to fund those mentors. They do have to participate in weekly teacher collaborations, and of course, they have to have a clear criminal background check. LDOE has been tasked with evaluating and reporting to the legislature on this particular program no later than December of 2028. And it does have a sunset date for this program to end at the end of the calendar year for 2033. Again, there's a lot of details that we have to figure out. Right now, this is not something that the department will be issuing a certification for, at least not initially. And so we have to figure out what all policies this will affect, and we'll provide you an update as soon as we have those. We do plan to also have some updates around this also at August Bessie. The next bill was House Bill 472 by Mency. It was also signed by the governor. It was Act 371. It started as the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact. Then it kind of got stalled due to some, I guess we'll call it states' rights issues with the proposed language. And so Representative Mency substituted with a military and military spouse provision, since that's kind of how this Interstate Mobility Compact started to begin with. And so what this particular bill does is it requires the Department of Education to grant a 5-year certificate to a active military or military spouse serving in Louisiana. And that eligibility determination has to be made within 20 days of receipt of a complete application. We are still working with Representative Mency to see what other pieces he might have intended when we codify the policy, but we do plan to also have this policy proposed for August Bessie as well. Now, the big one was Senate Bill 197. It did a lot of stuff for certification. Again, we were assisting Senator Peacock with some of this. He proposed this. Some of these things that he proposed were his ideas. Some of them we asked him to propose. So it's kind of a conglomeration of a lot of certification needs. It too was also signed or became effective, and so it's Act 392. It does a lot of things. The first thing it does is it redesignates portions of that certification law, and it makes some technical changes. So right now, certification law is or was in 17.7.1 and 17.7, and it was just kind of a hodgepodge of certification requirements, and you could see the trends over the years, and it was really, really long, both of them were. And so what they've done in this particular piece is they've kind of reorganized it so that different sections of law will now have, you know, main topics that it's discussing. It's not just rambling from one topic to the next. So a lot of it was redesignation and technical changes. But some of the other big important pieces about it was that it will allow for conditional acceptance into a teacher preparation program for teacher candidates with a GPA of less than 2.0. So basically it brings back that GPA flexibility option for entrance into a teacher preparation program. The GPA flex does mean that they have to obtain a 3.0 GPA for the first 12 credit hours once they're enrolled, or they have to demonstrate mastery of competencies if they're enrolled in a program that does not award credit hours. 197 also updated literacy requirements to align the options for traditional and alternately prepared teacher candidates. We kind of threw it into both of those to make sure that if one of them didn't get passed, we would have it covered in at least one of them. And so that's the same one that I mentioned with Jefferson. The difference here is it does remove the limit of 3 hours of literacy option for secondary candidates. And that would be for, you know, candidates that are like in the mild moderate. They may need more hours of teaching, reading, that kind of thing. It also reiterates, did not change this portion, but reiterates that an applicant shall have completed at least 180 hours in actual teaching, and a substantial portion of that 180 hours of the preparation should be on an all-day basis. It also speaks to a literacy exam. Again, that literacy exam was put into law last year with an effective date of January 1st of 2024. It indicates that applicants applying for initial certification teaching kindergarten through third grade shall pass this rigorous teaching and reading exam. We are currently still working with our legal team around, you know, cohorts of candidates that this would be applicable to. We will update on that in the future as well. Again, a lot of these changes, we do plan to bring policy for August Bessie. So some other things that Senate Bill 197 or Act 392 addressed, it reiterates that an out-of-state candidate must have 3 years of out-of-state experience prior to teaching in Louisiana for exam exemption. This is not anything new, but as far as the redesignation, it just gets moved into a different spot. It does continue to identify that exams are required, and the exams required are pedagogy and like an applicant area of specialization. So that would be the content area exam is required for certification. It does provide for some exemptions and some issuance of provisional certificates in certain situations for candidates that don't have the exam. Some of those candidates would be like our foreign language immersion program teachers that don't have the exam. They can get a provisional license as long as they have a bachelor's degree. If they're otherwise eligible not to teach in that foreign associates program. Out-of-state candidates not meeting exam exclusion can obtain a provisional license without exams. That's of course our OS certificate. That's not something that's really changing. It's just, they're just clarifying this information. Something that is new is that it speaks to teacher preparation completers that lack exams by 10%. It kind of redefines what that looks like and how we can certify those candidates. It actually defines out-of-state exam exclusion, and it requires all this exam reporting to be reported on the Louisiana Department of Education website. The teacher prep candidate lacking 10%, that's a candidate that can be on a provisional license, which is the TEP. We'll get into that in a little bit more. But it's just allowing for the definition of who does and doesn't have to take exams and issuance of a provisional certificate if they don't have an exam. So the next thing is the TEP, which is what I was just mentioning earlier. So the TEP, or the temporary employment permit pathway, that was expanded last year. It was expanded again this year. Last year's expansion included graduate degree candidates. If they have a graduate degree in the subject that they're teaching, they have an option to be put on this TEP. And last year it also included teacher preparation program completers that had everything except for the exams passed, as long as their exam scores were in 10% of the passing scores. Those two were options that were expanded last year. What's happened this year that they expanded is they allowed a bachelor degree option. So for teacher candidates that have a bachelor's degree in a secondary subject area, shortage area, only, if their degree is from an accredited institution and they have a 2.5 GPA and they have passed all the content area exams associated with that particular area, then our office can issue them a TEP. Now, there are a couple of caveats to that TEP. Of course, the school system has to attest that there is no other certified candidate available. These TEP candidates do have to be mentored each year. They do have to receive a successful rating at the top two tiers, which is effective proficient or higher, which would be highly effective. If they're a teacher candidate that completed teacher prep or hasn't completed teacher prep, excuse me, they do have to complete a pre-service training before they can step foot in the classroom. And then, of course, there's some other provisions like after 5 years on a TEP with effective evaluations every year, with mentoring every year, with attestations that no other certified candidate has been able to be found every year, then that and as an attestation recommending employment by that school system for the following year. After 5 years, then a candidate can advance to a standard level certificate. One thing to note, the law does specify that any years on a TEP do not count towards tenure for any school systems that may be wondering about that. Some of the other items that 197 included were around out-of-state principal. It basically defines the exam exclusion and changes the certificate validity. So now an out-of-state principal certificate can be granted a 5-year provisional certificate, and it aligned the requirements similar to what we did with out-of-state teaching certificates last year, where the 1 year of in-state successful leading is no longer required for the candidate to successfully meet exam exclusion. So if a principal has 4 years of successful experience out of state as a leader prior to coming to Louisiana, then they can be excluded from those exams. For school psychologists, the law changed to where it says qualifications shall not be less than the NASP requirements, and then of course that the board may deem a school psychologist certified, which means we may not actually have to issue certification if the qualifications are in alignment with NASP, and we're going to be looking at policy around that as well. For TSAC, that's our Teacher Certification Appeals Council. This particular law also provides for options for membership when an entity that's named in law dissolves. So there are 9 entities that are specifically called out in law that make up this Teacher Certification Appeals Council. And we've heard rumors that one of them is dissolving, and so that would leave us with one less member. What this piece of legislation does is it allows Bessie to come up with a similar association nominating and to act as a nominating authority, and then the nomination and approval process will remain the same as those that are actually listed in statute. It just will allow Bessie to provide that member outside of the legislative session if it dissolves between legislative sessions, so that educators' certification are not impacted. It also updates criminal history requirements and prohibitions. So LDOE and Bessie cannot issue certification to anyone convicted of a crime in revised statute 15587.1c. There are some specific pieces that say, or some provisions that mention after an appeal, the board may issue certification to somebody convicted of a felony or someone in 15587.1c. Submitting fraudulent documentation or facilitating cheating if 5 years have passed and the board has received a formal appeal request for review. Some of the other things it does is it does prohibit certification of individuals with certain offenses. There are some drug-related offenses found in RS 4966, A, 967A, 968A, 969A, or 970A. Those are now prohibited from us issuing certification for those individuals. However, since that was allowed in previous statute, this particular law does provide what we'll call a grandfather clause for those that have already been issued a credential, or if they had an appeal already and they or an appeal pending prior to July 1st with those particular prohibited offenses. We will post on our website a report regarding any appeals for these individuals with these types of offenses. And then beginning on January 1st, 2025, any applicant for initial certification will undergo a background check specifically for certification. You know, the past 2 years, we've had some an FBI audit, and there was some legislation that was going to require essentially 2 background checks, one for certification, one for employment. What's happening now is beginning January 1st of 2025, that's when the certification background checks will start. In the meantime, for anybody that's currently certified, the LDOE is going to check the wrap-backs for anybody already certified whenever that educator tries to advance or renew or otherwise modify their certificate. There will be some instances that the LDOE may obtain a new criminal history check. The law authorizes us to do that. We're going to work with our legal team to determine when those instances are, and we're going to codify policy around that. It also requires that educators and administrators, or if you're an other credentialed personnel, if you have a certificate issued by LDOE, have to notify us and their employer of any felony convictions or 15587.1 offenses, any convictions of that nature within 2 business days of the final conviction. And there are some penalties imposed in that law regarding that. That's 2 business days, excluding weekends, of course, which wouldn't be a business day. It also speaks to the board revoking an educator's credential for conviction that's listed in 15587.1 and any felony offense. We're also going to notify the last known school that employed that person anytime we revoke a credential. And we're going to make available on our website, which we already do, the identities of any person who has a credential that's been denied, suspended, or revoked for the following things: either the felony convictions or convictions of RS 15587.1, also convictions for or any actions taken on a person who's submitted fraudulent documentation, or actions taken for any person who's been found to have facilitated cheating on a state assessment. Those identities are found if you go to teachlouisiana.net and you look up that educator's certificate. If they have a conviction and it's been denied, suspended, or revoked, you'll see a notation listed under their certificate that has been denied, suspended, or revoked. It won't indicate to the public why, but it will indicate that it has been done. And just know that anytime it's suspended or revoked or denied, it would be from one of these particular things listed here: felony conviction, a conviction in 15587.1, submitting fraudulent documents, or facilitating cheating on state assessments. Um, 197 also indicates that, and I have to double check this date with legal. There didn't seem to be a date, but it's in alignment with some of the other pieces of the certification issuance. So it kind of alludes that beginning January 1st of 2025, an employing school system may determine that an individual with a credential issued by LDOE has not been convicted of a criminal offense, because if we've issued them a certificate, we've hopefully received a background check from employers, our copy, and we would have taken action if they have certain offenses. And so a CBC would not be required for the applicants with a teaching credential issued by LDOE, unless, of course, it says that it's been denied, suspended, or revoked. I do have to double check that date with our legal team. I was hoping she would have an answer by today, but she did not. So this is just what I think it is. I think it's January 1st of 2025 is when that will start, but I will update that on our next monthly call for sure. It also mentions that, of course, any administrator, teacher, or other school employee must notify of a final conviction or no contest plea to any criminal offense except for traffic offenses. They have to notify their employer and the LDOE within 2 business days. 197 also repeals the requirement for the issuance of the teaching authorization, and we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. And then, of course, it updates 15587.1 to include all those newly redesignated sections of law where it's restructuring all certification law. It updates 15587 to include all of those. Basically, the piece about the teaching authorization means that we won't be issuing those anymore for substitute teachers or uncertified teachers or administrators in the non-public and charter schools. And I do have a slide about that later on. The last piece is House Bill 326 from Nelson. This one was kind of a surprise to me that I just found out about last week, actually. So I'm still digging into this. It is Act 347. It does require that teacher preparation programs include instruction on foundational numeracy skills that include, but that are not limited to the items that are listed here on this slide. The Act does require that BESI revise teacher certification requirements and teacher preparation program requirements to require these numeracy skills. We have to update it by 12/31 of this year. So it's a quick turnaround time. We are hoping that we can update the policy that has a future effective date so that teacher preparation program providers can update their programs. We will provide more information when we get more information on this one. Again, a little bit of a surprise, just found out about it last week, but it's similar to the literacy requirements, I would say, but it's specific to math and numeracy. That's a lot of information. So I'll pause right here to see if you have any questions about the legislation. And again, most of this is going to be codified in policy in upcoming months. We're going to try and get as much of it sent to BESI for August BESI, which is the next section that we're talking about, the proposed policy updates that we're already working on. Anything that we don't get codified for August BESI will provide an implementation plan of when we're going to try and get that codified. Any questions? Please feel free to unmute or send in the chat. Act 347, no, it doesn't go into effect 12/31. We have to update our teacher certification requirements and teacher education program requirements 12/31/2023. We have to update it by then, and our hope is that similar to literacy, how we had to update literacy policy by June of last year, but we had a future effective date. We're hoping we can do the same thing with this numeracy piece because that's a pretty quick turnaround. But we're going to have to connect with our content team, our preparation team, and all of that. I'm thinking similar to literacy, we'll have to maybe update the numeracy competencies or the math competencies if we're not already meeting the requirements of this law. And then from there, we'll update preparation and certification requirements. So it might be a two-step process there for policy. We have a question, the background check that will start in 2025. Will there be an additional fee? There will be a processing fee for the background check for certification, yes. And again, that will be for anybody for initial certification, for new certification. So like teachers coming out of teacher preparation programs, educators coming from out of state, that kind of thing. for currently certified educators or educators that have certification with us through that 2025 date, what we'll be checking is RATbacks, which a RATback is an update, a state update every so often whenever there's a new conviction or arrest. Again, we have to get with our legal team to see. It does allow for us to request a new background check on existing educators if needed, and we're going to have to determine like when we think that might be needed and codify that in policy. So that is likely going to be something that won't come in August. I would imagine that's going to be something that we have to do a little bit of research compared to what other states are doing before we bring that to Bessie for that. All right, we are at 11 o'clock, and so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next section. I do see one last question. Will the background check replace the professional conduct form? No, it will not replace the professional conduct form. We will continue to have the professional conduct form as a part of every application, and the educators will be asked to answer that, you know, honestly each time when they apply. Will it be added to a fee already paid or a separate fee? We've got to figure out the actual process. We have to build a system to even request these things to begin with. So the logistics of that, we don't have that completely figured out. It's likely, from what I've seen of other systems similar to it, will be a separate fee that's happening at the very beginning of the certification process. They'll go and get their fingerprint and their background check. Then once it's cleared, they would move on to the rest of the process. And so there would be certification processing fee after the rest of the process. So one for the CBC and then one for regular certification. So we have a message that says we require, it's a university, we require background checks yearly at the university, and that they must be fingerprinted and background checked at the beginning of residency, so they will need to complete another background check. This will happen for certification when they go apply for certification starting in 2025. And we don't have all of the details for that just yet, but as soon as we have them, we will provide those. So I'm going to go ahead and move on now to the proposed policy updates so that we can get through all of the items that we have. Again, continue to type in the chat. We'll be happy to answer when we take another break towards the end of the call. So proposed policy update. So of course, in an effort to align with all this proposed legislation that I just mentioned, we're going to be proposing some additional policy updates at August Bessie. And so some of those proposed revisions that we know, now that we know that it's passed, will be related to the literacy policy alignment. It'll be related to GPA flexibility. It will be related to the TEP expansion. We're going to be including that bachelor degree option for shortage areas in secondary areas. It's also can be allowed for if somebody doesn't have the GPA met, if they completed a teacher preparation program, or for out-of-state completers that don't have the exams met either. We're also including policy that will address the third-party vendor, what we're calling third-party vendor or contracted educators, and non-public evaluation and evaluation mixing. We think that that will be a significant change for our educators, especially educators that, you know, want to teach wherever they want to teach and what's best for their family. So we're bringing policy around that. Around TA removal, the teaching authorization removal, we're bringing policy around the CBC updates. Again, the CBC updates, we may have part of that in August and part of that later. Of course, the military certificate update, and then the associate's degree option. In addition to that, you know, anytime we take a look at policy, we try to clean up as much as we can. And so we're going to try and streamline and update a lot of our policy, and in some instances accommodate some stakeholder requests. There's some additional policy revisions that are being proposed at August Bessie. Those include reinstatement criteria. We're trying to remove the reinstatement criteria that requires additional coursework. We're going to move to effectiveness instead. We're looking at OFAT renewal requirements, non-public certificates. We were initially going to bring some additional non-public certifications We were going to be creating some, but now since the law passed that will allow us to mix, what that's going to allow is that instead of creating those new certificates, it means that our non-public educators will now be able to apply for and renew things like ancillary or talented artist, math for professionals, dyslexia therapist, school counselor, all those things that were previously not really allowed in the non-public setting will now be allowed. So we hope that that update will solve a lot of issues that have been requested by some of our stakeholder groups. We're also aligning artists or creating artist and talented endorsement for educators that already have an art teaching certificate, so they don't have to maintain 2 certificates. We're also making edits to reduce the number of duplicative certifications for personnel that have other professional credentials, like occupational therapists or just like what we did with school nurse. So there's a whole host of professional certifications that have credentials from other agencies. So we're going to deem them as certified instead of actually issuing another certificate if we can do that. We're also going to be aligning geometry and algebra 1 certifications, and then there's a whole host of technical edits. So we have a lot of work left to do. We've been working on this for quite some time, and we're making the tweaks that are in alignment with law as well. Any questions there? Will the associate's degree option work for those enrolled in REACH working to complete their bachelor in elementary education? That is a great question. I'm not sure I have the answer to that. We can take a look and find out. I'm not sure. Let me make that note. It's a great question. And that may also be a question for REACH as well, but I can see what I can find out, and we can try and provide that for the next monthly call. All right, so let's move on to certification updates. In other words, what has happened recently? So there's been some literacy policy updates. Just to kind of give the background, in alignment with 2021 legislation, last year, literacy policy updates were approved regarding the science of reading competencies. Those competencies are required for all literacy coursework. And while teacher preparation providers have some time to design and restructure their teacher preparation literacy coursework, the policy around the add-on requirements became effective in January. And so what we did, basically we noticed a misalignment of policy, and we originally planned to bring it in March prior to like any applications being denied. But because that policy also was affected by proposed legislation, the decision was made to wait until we brought all of our legislative alignment policy in August. Now, we had some educators that were affected by this policy that voiced their concerns. And so what we did at June was we brought a proposal to update that literacy policy specifically around mild moderate add-on certifications to June BESI. That policy has a future effective date for that add-on policy, and that policy is effective immediately. So basically what it does is it aligns that future effective date with the future effective date that teacher preparation programs need to have the coursework aligned. So basically, beginning with the 2024-2025 school year, both program completers and anybody for add-on will have to have these updated Literacy Foundation Science of Reading aligned coursework, which does include those 9 semester hours for special education areas. For any applications that were recently denied specifically for this issue that the future effective date corrected, we reviewed those for no additional fee, provided that the signatures had not expired. And then if the signatures had expired, we just requested some new documents with new signatures, and no additional fee was charged for that as well. But all of those applications have been reprocessed, and just know that this future effective date is currently effective immediately. However, because legislation also impacts the very same literacy requirements. We're going to be bringing some more literacy policy to be updated in August. That's going to align with the legislation that just passed. The TA, or Teaching Authorization Update. So as of June 14th, per Act 392 of the 2023 legislative session, the TA is no longer required to be issued by BESI. And so that authorization is not needed to pursue employment as a substitute teacher or an uncertified teacher or administrator at a public charter or non-public school. Although LEAs are still responsible for administering criminal background checks on all employees prior to hiring. So we no longer have to issue those certificates. So you don't have to send in those applications, and it was effective June 14th. So any applications in queue will be closed, and we're going to send this verbiage out indicating that in the response to that particular application. Now, one thing to be aware of is any person that has a teaching authorization or TA already issued, that is still valid. And we will still continue to monitor any wrapbacks that we receive on an educator that is holding this TA. And if action is necessary, we will be taking the necessary action on that certification. I'm going to pause just for a minute. We're having extremely bad weather. Give me just 1 second. I apologize for that pause. My internet was a little bit unstable due to the bad weather. Okay, let's see if we can continue going here. Can everyone still hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you, Christy.
Okay, thank you. So some other updates that we have are about OFAT processing updates. So we received some stakeholder feedback, and so we're planning to update some procedures for the out-of-field authority to teach, or the OFAT certificates. Currently, those OFATs are valid for a school session, which means it's valid from July 1st to June 30th. And in some instances, that means that if you apply for one in like March, it's going to be retroactive to the beginning of the school year, and really reduces the amount of time that that teacher candidate is serving on that OFAT, and reducing the amount of time that that teacher candidate has to complete those OFAT requirements. So this is not something that requires a policy update, thankfully. So we can change our procedures beginning on July 1st of this year. So that's next week. Gosh. We'll be issuing them for a year from the date that it's issued. And so we would appreciate any feedback that you have regarding this change. In the event that, you know, there's some unforeseen consequence, but we feel like this is in the best interest for teacher candidates. We did the same thing with a PL several years ago, and it seemed to help. And so we're hoping this will do the same for the OFAT. The next piece is about TAT, the processing for TAT. So also, after some stakeholder feedback, we are planning to update processing procedures for the temporary authority to teach, or the TAT certificate. Currently, they're issued for a year. However, the TAT area is not allowed to be changed. And so since the TAT is really a workforce shortage certificate, effective July 1st, also the same date, which is next week, at the time of renewal or extension of that TAT, the school system can change the certification area, and or the school system, the LEA, can be changed on that TAT certificate. We do ask that you wait until it is that time for renewal so that it's less confusing for everyone involved. Just keep in mind that there is a 3-year maximum that a person can serve on a TAT, no matter the number of areas or the number of LEA changes. And every year on the TAT does count towards the maximum allowable years. Now, right now, there's no other processing changes to that, but do expect to have some policy updates for the TAT provided in August to align with the GPA flexibility option that is allowed for entrance into a teacher preparation program. We expect we'll bring that GPA flex option back to the TAP as well. But that hasn't happened just yet. All right. Any other questions about that section? Let's see. A copy of this PowerPoint will be posted both on our online portal. I believe it was also dropped in the chat to everyone earlier. And Paula, if you don't mind, if you can drop that in the chat again as well. It's also going to be posted to our normal school system support library under certification monthly call. All right, I am going to turn it over to my colleague and Deputy Director, Paula Bell, to take care of this next section, the certification reminders.
Hey, good morning. So the contact and communication with our office, the certification experts, is done through the online Teach LA Live portal. We provide responses to those questions in writing in less than 5 business days, in some cases, same day. That's the quickest way to get to us. Using the online portal provides transparency and accountability for our team so that we want to make sure the information is shared there is accurate and provides data so that our team can make decisions moving forward in terms of staffing and work responsibilities in regards to answering those questions. The more details you provide in your question, the more specific our answer can be to you. So providing a certificate number, educator's name, be very, very specific, and we can guide you appropriately. If you are an HR person or a program provider, your authenticated account will permit you to schedule a call with us. The calls are limited to 15-minute sessions. You can schedule multiple appointments back to back if you have a very complex case or complex question. Sometimes questions are best answered verbally, and this is the mechanism we have put into place that will allow you to speak with us directly. That's Monday through Thursday, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. to 4 p.m., barring state closures and holidays as well. So the school nurse policy, I think we hit on this last month. At the January Bessie, the school nurse policy was updated. It states that beginning August 1st of 2023, a registered nurse who holds a current valid license in good standing with the Louisiana State Board of Nursing is considered certified by Bessie. You wouldn't have to request or apply for that ancillary service certificate for your school nurses if they hold their valid registered nurse license. Use the school nurse guidance document. We've linked it here in this presentation to review any of the frequently asked questions regarding this change. Make sure that you verify the license online. It is a verifiable document through the State Board of Nursing. Provide your school nurse training and review existing local policy surrounding hiring and placement of your school nurses. So processing updates, we are working with additional resources to process applications. They may be processed out of order for some applications during the next few weeks. You may see applications in the following categories processed before others: that early childhood ancillary, the ECAC, TAs, which we're not processing anymore. So you should be receiving closure notification of those cases where you've already submitted TA apps. We use that language in reference to the laws that are permitting us to close those cases out without processing TAs. Others processed out of order you may see before others are the TATs, the renewal hire applications, the mentor teacher content leader packets, the resident certificates, and your practitioner's license, as well as your initial applications. We really are striving to issue certificates to those who may not have yet received any type of license. Those are priority, and we are trying to get those out. So you'll see those sometimes processed out of order. So we've kind of analyzed the certification applications that we've received. And in that analysis, our findings are that there are a significant number of incomplete, inaccurate, or incorrectly submitted applications. And all of those things will contribute to the increased processing time for those applications. So we're asking that you would help us in reviewing all of those apps before you upload them to the online portal. Review the following best practices slides just to make sure that those apps are properly prepared for uploading. And this will help our team process these much more quickly, and you won't get the feedback of, oh, you've got to close this out and start over, which is very aggravating for you and for our team as well. So let's look at those reminders, those best practices. Read and follow the directions. So there's a cover sheet of every application packet that we remind you of the policy and what needs to be included. Please do not include parts of a separate application within one. For example, if a teacher wants to add on and he needs to renew his certificate, you wouldn't upload those two together as one case. Each one would be separate. When scanning, we request that you scan upright and in the order of the application checklist if possible, combining all pieces into a single PDF. A physical scanner may have settings that allow you to do this as a single PDF. There's scanning apps you can use, such as Genius Scan, Cam Scanner, and most of our iPhones, smartphones have camera apps or some print to PDF tool. We understand there are some documents that are like transcripts or practice scores that won't permit combining, and that's okay. Just upload those separately. But for the documents that can be, we ask that they be placed into one single PDF. Also, choose the appropriate category for the application that's uploaded when you're submitting it. And if it is a document that was related to a previous case, make sure you select the feedback follow-up as the application type from the dropdown. That allows us to separate these applications for quicker processing. Ensure that your questions are submitted as questions and your applications are submitted as applications and not vice versa. If you have a question, you wouldn't do that as an application type. So it helps us in bucketing the work to make sure that they are all labeled appropriately. So when you're submitting self-evaluations, remember the self-evaluations are those little checklists that are available to the public to download. And we ask that those course titles and course numbers are included. Just a checklist that says, yes, 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 that doesn't help us. We need to know what the educator had in mind for that preparation, for that course. So please include the titles and numbers. If there is a professional license that's required, ensure that they have a current validity. So for example, your speech pathologist, make sure that it is a valid license. When a graduate degree is a qualifying requirement for the issuance of a certificate, like a higher level 3, or eligibility for Ed Leader, or an endorsement such as academically gifted, the degree, because it's required for that request, it's placed on the certificate at the time of the add-on issuance or eligibility. If there is no need to apply for the degree, there is no need to apply for the degree to be added separately or to pay an additional fee for it to be put on the certificate when it was part of a requiring or qualifying requirement for another request. Please note, eligibility letters submitted for issuance of a certificate also require the picture ID and copy of the Social Security card as stated in the eligibility letter. All righty. Do we have any questions? I'll turn it back over to Christy and we'll see what we can do to answer your questions.
Please feel free to unmute or type in the chat. There was a question in the chat that said the new literacy requirement 9 hours of reading plus 3 credit hours of reading intervention for the add-on for sped mild moderate will be in effect August 2024, 2025. Will the old application be put back on the website for current students to use? So just to clarify, the literacy options that are updated include a total of 9 semester hours for that mild moderate add-on. 3 of those hours are specific to students with disabilities. Those requirements do begin in 2024, 2025. The application really hasn't changed. It would be that the checklist, and so we'll clarify on that checklist that's outward facing instead of the application. We have a question.
Christy, I have a question. It's Glenda Hembry from Loyola.
Sure.
I submitted my residence applications for fall on Friday, and I already have a change of school this morning. What's the process for doing that, or do we need to actually change it on the residency application?
It does need to be changed on, so I would imagine that resident certificate hasn't been issued yet. Is that correct? If you submitted on Friday?
No.
You should be able to go into the history of that application that you submitted on Friday, using the history option, and you should be able to update that placement in that application there, as long as that application says that it doesn't belong to anybody, as long as it says unassigned.
Okay.
Then you can use the history button to upload that additional, to make that correction to that application. It may require you to download and, make the change on the application and re-upload it. But it can be done as long as it's not been processed or assigned to a specialist.
Okay.
And that could potentially affect funding. So we do want to make sure that we get that correct.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Looks like we have a question from Renita Sherrard. I apologize if I did not pronounce your name correctly. It says, what form specifically do you use to add on certification? That would be the EV application, the certification evaluate add-on name change application would be the EV. Once the literacy requirements are updated, will other certification areas besides K-3 be required to take the teaching reading exam, such as elementary, middle school, secondary ELA, or mild moderate? So that's a tricky question. Looks like it's Chris Joyce from LRCE. So there's a couple of things at play. There are the science of reading literacy requirements that require certain things. And then there's a law that was passed that says that teachers teaching K-3 will be required to take this teaching of reading exam. And so the way that our structure works, we do pre-K to 3, elementary 1 to 5, 4 to 8, 6 to 12. That's 2 areas that will be required to take that teaching of reading exam. So your pre-K to 3 and your elementary 1 to 5 will be required to take that teaching of reading exam. Now, what we've done is we have worked with ETS, which is the company that administers Praxis, to work on a Louisiana specific teaching of reading exam that is going to be a part of that elementary multiple subjects exam. So, that elementary multiple subjects exam is currently the 5001, 5002, 3, 4, 5. Well, the 5001 is the group for all of them, and the 2, 3, 4, and 5 are the math, ELA, science, and social studies. What we're doing is we're basically kind of taking that ELA portion and replacing it with the teaching of reading portion of the exam. It can be bundled the same way that the multiple subjects can be done. We're going to have some updates around that. That exam will be available in September of this year, should be. And so we'll have some other policy updates available in August to line that out, but should not affect middle school or secondary currently. Now, mild moderate, we would have to get to our, we'll have to get with our special education department to see if it will be applicable there. Let's see. Any other questions? Looks like, Glenda, looks like you also have a question about an office hours call scheduled to discuss the transcript with no grades to determine if it's acceptable for the individual to enroll in your MAT program. Can you send a copy of the transcript for review? What I would recommend, Glenda, on that particular instance, submit the transcript as an application, and then just title it as office hours, and you can reference that in your office hours call, and we can look at it that way. That would be the best way for you to submit that.
So
It should allow you to do that.
what kind of application would I select?
You can select initial or feedback follow-up just for those purposes, because I think afterwards either you can or we can at least go in and change that to office hours. Just keep record of that particular case number, and when we're on the call with you, we'll take a look at it in that case and title it appropriately.
I would definitely recommend feedback follow-up, just so that our first line reviewers won't bump something back saying, oh, we don't see an app here. So a feedback follow-up would be best, and then put in the comment to be discussed during office hours.
Okay, thank you so much.
Christy, we have a question from Tulane. We're moving from certification only programs to traditional and graduate programs. So this fall, we'll be beginning all of those programs and kind of phasing out our cert only, whereas they will be maybe streamlined into the MAT if appropriate and meet credentialing. For the entering class of residents that would have been cert only, they now have the option to move tracks to the MAT program, and there'll be some coursework involved. And most likely for those students that will be completing a residency, they'll have a few courses left to take the next summer, maybe even into the next academic year. So the dilemma is, or my question is, where I keep going back and forth is, do we initially certify them? And I think this gets at what Paula was speaking about earlier. Do we initially certify them as, as if they went through the post-bac program? Or do we wait for all MAT requirements to be completed and then submit the initial certification? We're at a dilemma and when to do this.
Sure. That sounds like that's a complicated situation. We probably need to hop on a call with our prep providers as well, our program approval, so that we can figure. I'm sure you've talked to Emily and Rebecca about this also.
Yes, we have. And there's just, as the questions begin to come in from candidates, that's where I pause and I say, I just want to make sure.
Sure. We probably need to schedule a call with all parties involved, program approval and certification, to figure out what's best. Because here's the thing, like, your candidates do need to follow and you need to follow the BESI approved program. And so it's going to depend on, like, are they a teacher of record? Is it a true resident? I mean, they will have to have a pre-service certificate, but it sounds like we need to have a call specifically to this with everybody.
Okay, great. Should I begin with you, or who should I start that chain with?
You can either start it with me, or you can start it with Rebecca or Emily if you have their contact information. If you don't, you can just start it with me, and we'll get you something scheduled.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Let's see. We have LRCE. Chris Joyce says, so will that be required before a PL can be issued if it's replacing a part of a subtest? I'm assuming that you're talking about the teaching of reading piece, Chris?
Yeah, I am. You had mentioned the fact that it was replacing part of the ELA portion, and so I was just wondering if this is now part of the subtest. Do they need to take this as part of the PL, or how does that work if it's a little bit different than it used to be?
So, considering it's part of a content exam, I would imagine it would need to be taken before the PL, but that's a good question because it's really kind of a pedagogy. I see what you're asking. We'll have that conversation with our prep team and see if we can get an answer for that. We're still having conversations about the teaching of reading literacy exam, and policy updates have not been brought to BESI yet. So we have time to answer that. I'll bring that to our literacy group, see if we can get that answered for you.
Yeah, thank you, because I would imagine I have to teach them how to teach kids how to read before they take that rather than have it be part of an entrance exam.
Right.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, let's see. Cassie Harwell, will combining the teaching of reading and ELA for multiple subjects cause those trying to get into the alt-cert program more difficulty considering they've had no reading coursework prior? Okay, so that looks like that's related to this same. And then there's another comment. We require the teaching of reading to exit our program because we teach them the skills. Again, that's related to the same. I'll bring this to the literacy team. That's, looking at all these parts and pieces, and we'll see if we can get that updated and question answered for you all, and then provided either in next month's monthly call or at the very latest when we bring the policy for August Bessie. Can we start admitting people under the reverse GPA requirement? So the pre-PL policy, which was something that was to put as a stopgap, I believe that policy states that it ends at the end of the legislative session. The new law is currently in effect, but we're not bringing policy until August. So admission under the reverse GPA requirement, that's a little gray. We can get that answer as well. Question, Stephanie Auten. For clarification, the science of reading praxis will be replacing the current language arts reading praxis 5002. So essentially, yes, that's, well, they're basically going to rebundle the whole elementary multiple subjects test is my understanding. We haven't gotten all the reports yet from EPS. We just had the standard setting study last week. So it'll take a few weeks for them to get the reports to us. But my understanding is they're going to be kind of basically renumbering the entire bundle for the elementary multiple subjects exam. But yes, essentially the ELA competencies are already included in the teaching of reading as well. And so the science of reading or teaching of reading praxis will be replacing that particular test. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat. There's a lot today, I realize, and we are about 7 minutes overdue. I apologize. I didn't realize we were over. There's a whole lot. The last is our call summary. It just shows our important dates. Computer Science Education Advisory Commission. We have 2 holidays coming up, the 3rd and the 4th. Our next monthly call is July 17th. Then we have Non-Public School Council, Early Child Care Education Advisory Council, and Superintendent's Advisory Council meeting. That gets us through July. Anyone else have any other questions? Thank you all so much for bearing with us and staying on these few extra minutes. Stay safe and hope you have a good afternoon.
Happy holidays all.
Yes, indeed.